Scientists search for the lost city of Atlantis.
Is one of the world's greatest mysteries about to be solved? For years, many people have wondered if a place called Atlantis was real. The ancient Greek philosopher Plato first wrote about Atlantis long ago. If it did exist, where was it? About 2,500 years ago, Plato wrote about an island near the Pillars of Hercules. He said it was home to great leaders who had unusual powers. They had many ships and were very scientifically developed. He said their land was as big as Libya and Asia together. And then, in one day and one night, a great earthquake caused Atlantis to sink into the ocean, never to be seen again. Today, scientists know that the Pillars of Hercules was also called the Straits of Gibraltar. It is a narrow waterway that separates southern Spain from North Africa. 2 years ago, an American-led team of researchers began searching for Atlantis in this general area. They started with a satellite picture of what looked like an underwater city near Cadiz, Spain. Then they used a special kind of radar to help them see under the ocean floor.
Cadiz is about 100 kilometers from Gibraltar. Plato wrote that Atlantis once faced a city called Gadara. That is the old name for what is now Cadiz. Here, the researchers found what seems to be the remains of a sunken city that was built in a circle. That is also how Plato described Atlantis. In this sunken city, the researchers found a stone carving that is thought to be an Atlantean soldier. University of Hartford archaeologist Richard Freund directed the research team. He says he found something interesting farther inland in central Spain. He discovered a series of cities built like Atlantis. He thinks they may have been made by people from Atlantis who escaped the earthquake and waves that covered the area. His work was described in a television program on the National Geographic Channel.
There are many people who think that the search for Atlantis is a waste of time. They say that Plato made up the story. They look at his work as fiction, a good story that was never meant to be taken as true. They also think it was not possible for so large an area to be destroyed in so short a time. Professor Freund and his team know that many people think Atlantis was never real, but his team plans to continue their research under the sea and in central Spain.
The Industrial Revolution of the 18 and 1900s was a time of great change for the world. Factories and their machines began to do much of the work that human beings had once done by hand. But many of those machines used coal to provide their power. Pollution of the air and water quickly became a problem. Many people think that the Industrial Revolution was the first time people began to have a major effect on the Earth's ecology. That, they say, was the beginning of climate change. But now, a new report says that humans started these changes thousands of years ago. Jed Kaplan and Kristen Krumhart did the research. Both are with the Federal Polytechnic School in Lausanne, Switzerland. They say people began to harm the planet when they began cutting down trees to make farmland and places to live. The Swiss researchers think this could have started 8,000 to 10,000 years ago.
Trees and plants take in the gas carbon dioxide and give off oxygen. But if a great many trees are cut down, more carbon dioxide rises into the air. That, the scientists say, causes our planet to heat up. This causes climate change, also known as global warming. In 2003, American William Rudiman first proposed that global warming resulted from human activities thousands of years ago. The University of Virginia professor even thought that this warming was so great that it helped the Earth avoid another ice age. His critics say there were not enough people on Earth at the time to cause that much damage. But Professor Rudiman believes he is right, and so do the Swiss researchers. Professor Kaplan and Ms. Krumhart built a model to see how land use changed over time. Their results show that nearly 2 times the amount of carbon was released into the air thousands of years ago than had been thought. They also made a video so people could see how land use had changed over thousands of years. The video shows the Earth changing from a mostly green color to a planet with large areas of brown.
Archaeologist Dorian Fuller of University College in London directed another study of climate change. He says the air began to suffer when people first started raising farm animals like cows, goats, horses, and pigs. When these animals process food, they produce a large amount of methane. This gas traps even more heat than carbon dioxide. He also says that growing rice in Asia added a large amount of methane to the air. Some of these findings were presented recently at a meeting of the American Geophysical Union in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Other studies will be presented in the journal Holocene later this year. Other than reducing the levels of these carbon gases, what can we do to help the environment? Scientists agree: plant more trees.
That is a curiosity. That is something that people in the southern United States often said when they saw something unusual that could not be explained easily. It also is probably what a number of reporters said earlier this month when they were permitted to see a machine that will be sent to the planet Mars. It is called a rover, and its name is Curiosity. The reporters saw the machine at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. The name of this space vehicle came from Clara Ma, a student from Kansas. 2 years ago, she won a competition to name the rover. She also plans to be at the launch area in Florida in November when Curiosity is sent on its way.
The new Mars rover is about the size of a small car. It is about 3 meters long and weighs over 900 kilograms. Curiosity is much heavier than older rovers called Spirit, Opportunity, and Sojourner. The American Space Agency says it will take Curiosity about 10 months to reach Mars. Then it will land, move around on its 6 large wheels, and begin a number of experiments. Scientists think Curiosity will send information back to Earth for at least 2 years. They hope it will find signs of life on the red planet. The space agency has called Curiosity a rolling laboratory. It will carry 10 instruments to test the Martian surface. A laser will be used to break up large objects it finds. It will have a drill to cut open and examine the inside of rocks. There are also cameras that can see long distances. Curiosity even has an arm that can touch things and send the information back to Earth.
The new Mars rover will have a nuclear battery that will enable it to travel great distances. It will not use energy from the sun, as in the past. Scientists have not decided exactly where on Mars they will land the vehicle. They are looking for a place that might offer the best chance for finding microbes, extremely small forms of life. However, they think they have found 4 such places. Getting to name the Mars rover was exciting for Clara Ma. Going to the launch will also be special. But there is one more prize that Clara won. Space agency officials are letting Clara sign her name on the bottom of the rover. Now, isn't that a curiosity? While we are talking about space, here is another piece of news. A company called SpaceX announced that it will be testing a new rocket next year. It is called the Falcon Heavy. The company says Falcon Heavy will be the most powerful rocket ever built. It will be able to carry 2 times more weight than the older Saturn V rocket. And scientists say that it will be able to carry a spacecraft around the Earth, to the Moon, or even to Mars.
American history, Roosevelt's foreign policy in the 1930s.
This week in our series, we continue to discuss the events of the 1930s and American foreign policy during that time. For much of its history, the United States was not involved in world disputes. Only in the 20th century did it become a powerful and influential nation. President Theodore Roosevelt was the first president to see America as a great power. A few years later, President Woodrow Wilson wanted the United States to become more involved in the world. Many Americans disagreed. They wanted to stay out of international conflicts. The presidents after Wilson stayed informed about world events, but they were much less willing to involve the United States than Roosevelt or Wilson had been. The Great Economic Depression that began in 1929 reduced Americans' interest in the world even more. Now, here are Doug Johnson and Shirley Griffith.
Franklin Roosevelt became president in 1933. Franklin Roosevelt was not like most Americans. He knew the international situation well from his own experience. Like Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson, he wanted to expand America's foreign policies. The terrible crisis of the Depression, however, forced him to spend most of his time on national economic issues. He was able to deal with international issues only very slowly. One of his most important first efforts was to improve relations with Latin American nations.
30 years earlier, President Theodore Roosevelt said the United States had the right to intervene in Latin America. In the years that followed, the United States sent troops to several Latin American countries. Many political leaders in the area accused the United States of treating them like children. Leaders throughout Latin America criticized the United States bitterly at a conference in 1928. When Franklin Roosevelt became president, he promised to treat Latin American nations as friends. He called this his good neighbor policy.
I would dedicate this nation to the policy of the good neighbor, the neighbor who resolutely respects himself and because he does so, respects the rights of others, the neighbor who respects his obligations and respects the sanctity of his agreements in and with a world of neighbors.
Roosevelt's new policy had an unfriendly beginning. His administration refused to recognize a government in Cuba that opposed the United States. Instead, it helped bring to power a new government that showed more support for the United States. After that, however, President Roosevelt was able to prove that he wanted to improve relations with the countries of Latin America. For example, his administration speeded up plans to withdraw American troops from Haiti. It rejected old treaties that gave the United States the right to intervene in Cuba. It recognized a revolutionary government in El Salvador. It recognized the right of Panama to help operate and protect the Panama Canal. And it helped establish the Export-Import Bank to increase trade throughout the Americas.
All of these actions did much to improve the opinion of Latin American leaders about the United States. However, the most important test of Franklin Roosevelt's new policies was in Mexico. The Mexican government seized control of oil companies owned by investors in the United States. A number of influential Americans wanted the president to take strong action. He refused. He only agreed to urge the Mexican government to pay American investors for the value of the oil companies.
As United States relations with Latin America improved, its relations with Britain got worse. Britain blamed Franklin Roosevelt for the failure of an international economic conference in 1933. It also felt the United States Congress was unwilling to take a strong position against international aggression by other nations. Some British leaders had so little faith in Roosevelt that they proposed seeking cooperation with Japan instead of the United States. New leaders in Japan, however, soon ended this possibility. They presented Britain with such strong military demands that the British government gave up any idea of cooperation with Japan.
One big question in American foreign policy in the 1930s concerned the Soviet Union. The United States had refused to recognize the government in Moscow after the Bolsheviks took control in 1917.
Yet Franklin Roosevelt saw the Soviet Union as a possible ally if growing tensions in Europe and Asia burst into war. For this reason, he held talks in Washington with a top Soviet official. In 1933, he officially recognized the Soviet government.
President Roosevelt hoped recognition would lead to better relations. But the United States and the Soviet Union did not trust each other. They immediately began arguing about many issues. Within 2 years, the American ambassador to Moscow urged President Roosevelt to cut diplomatic relations with the Soviets. Roosevelt refused. Relations between the two countries became even worse. Yet Roosevelt believed it was better to continue relations in case of an emergency. That emergency, World War II, was just a few years away.
Economic issues played an important part in American foreign policy during the early 1930s. In 1933, a major international economic conference was held in London. France and Italy led a movement to link the value of every nation's money to the price of gold. American delegates to the conference rejected the idea. They argued that it would slow America's recovery from the Great Depression. As a result, the London Conference failed. Although President Roosevelt opposed linking the value of the American dollar to the price of gold, he did not oppose international trade. During the 1930s, his administration negotiated new trade agreements with more than 20 countries.
The 1930s saw major political changes in Asia and Europe. President Roosevelt watched these developments with great interest. In Japan, military leaders gained control of the government. Their goal was to make Japan Asia's leading power. In Italy, the government was headed by fascist Benito Mussolini. Another fascist, Francisco Franco, seized power in Spain. And most important, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party increased their strength in Germany. Franklin Roosevelt understood much sooner than most Western leaders the threat that these new leaders represented.
Most Americans shared Roosevelt's dislike for the new fascist movements. However, Americans felt another emotion much more strongly. It was their desire to stay out of war. World War I had just ended 15 years earlier. It was still fresh in the minds of many Americans. A majority of the population opposed any policy that could involve the United States in another bloody conflict.
A public opinion study was made in 1937. The study showed that 71% of Americans believed it had been a mistake for the United States to fight in World War I. So President Roosevelt was not surprised when Congress passed a law ordering the administration to remain neutral in any foreign conflict. Congress also refused an administration proposal that the United States join the World Court. Franklin Roosevelt shared the hope that the United States would stay out of foreign conflicts. However, Adolf Hitler and other fascists continued to grow more powerful. The situation forced Americans to begin to consider the need for military strength.
Americans did not want to become involved in another world war. They called on President Roosevelt and their representatives in Congress to remain neutral in world affairs. But aggression by Germany and Japan would force Americans to choose between their desire for democracy and their desire for peace. That will be our story next week.
How to make your own solar water heater.
Solar water heaters are used around the world and are not very difficult to build. The system we are going to describe is based on a design developed some years ago in Afghanistan. Since then, it has been built and used in many countries. It can heat 70 liters of water to 60 degrees Celsius. It can do this between sunrise and noon on a clear day with an average air temperature of 32 degrees Celsius. There are two parts to the solar water heater. One part is made of a sheet of metal painted black. Black surfaces become hotter in the sun than surfaces painted any other color. This black metal plate is called a collector. The collector is placed in contact with the water. There are several kinds of metal sheets that can be used for the collector. Corrugated metal will work very well. Corrugated sheets are often used as roofs on housing. Once the water is heated, it is kept hot with insulation material. This allows the water to stay warm for a long time. The second part of the solar water heater holds the water for the system. This storage tank can be a container that holds about 100 liters. Two rubber pipes are attached to the water storage tank. One pipe lets water flow into the system. The other lets water flow out. When the water heater is working correctly, water will flow from the storage tank to the collector and back again. You can use the hot water at the top of the tank for washing and cleaning. You can change the flow of water so that the temperature is hot or warm as desired. This solar water heater is easy to build and operate. It will last about 2 years before the rubber pipes need to be replaced. There is also something else you will need to make the solar water heater work: the sun. As you might imagine, the heater will heat water only on sunny days. You can get more information about solar water heaters and other projects from Enterprise Works Vita. This group works internationally to fight poverty. The website is enterpriseworks.org. Choose the link for news and resources, then click on Publications.
Growing chili peppers, a heated subject.
Some people say eating hot chili peppers can help you breathe easier if you have a cold. Others believe that chilies give you more energy. All we know is that people have been growing chilies for centuries, and there are plenty of different kinds of chili peppers to choose from, along with different levels of heat. Want to spice up your meals with homegrown chilies? They need a warm climate. If you plant the seeds outside when the weather is cool, place a glass over them. That will add warmth from the sun and protect them from wind. You can also start the seeds in your home or a greenhouse. If you plant chili peppers inside, fill an 8-centimeter pot with soil. The pot should have holes in the bottom so water can run out. Tap the sides of the pot to settle the soil. Drop several seeds over the surface of the pot and cover with a thin layer of vermiculite. Vermiculite is a material that can hold air, water, and nutrients. Then cover the top of the pot with a see-through plastic bag. Hold the bag in place with a rubber band. Place the pot in a warm area. When the chilies start growing, take off the bag. When the plants have reached about 2 centimeters high, place each one carefully in its own 8-centimeter pot. When the roots show through the holes in the bottom of the pot, transplant each seedling into a 12-centimeter pot. When the plants are 20 centimeters high, tie the plants to a stick placed in the pot to support them. When the chili peppers are 30 centimeters high, pinch the tops off with your fingers. That should get new branches to grow. When the first flowers show, give the plants some potash fertilizer. When the weather is warm, put them into 5-liter pots and place them outside. Make sure they get a good amount of light and water. Some people like mild chilies. Others like plenty of heat. Some like to harvest the plants when the chilies are green. Others like their chilies red. Either way can give color and taste to many different foods.
Beauties in the garden, growing ornamental trees and bushes.
Trees and plants are called ornamentals if their main job is to add beauty and interest to a garden. Dogwood trees, for example, are a popular ornamental in some areas because of their white or pink blooms in the spring. Cherry and plum trees can also add beauty to landscaping, even if they never produce fruit. Ornamental trees and bushes or shrubs can serve other useful purposes besides just looking good. Some also smell good and can be used to make scented oils, for example, lavender and lilac. Ornamentals can be used to mark the border of a property or to provide privacy from neighbors. They can be used to hide trash cans and storage sheds. Most ornamentals have the same needs as other plants: water, mulch, pruning for shape, and inspection for pests. But Master Gardener Bob Arazi says most of them take care of themselves after the first 6 months. Bob Arazi is a horticultural advisor in Howard County, Maryland. Years of experience have shown him that people often decide to plant an ornamental bush when they see one in bloom. They might see the yellow blooms on a forsythia bush, one of the first signs of spring, and decide to plant one. But he says most ornamentals are better to plant just before their leaves open. Some ornamentals and other plants are sold with their roots in a ball of dirt, held together with burlap. But David Robson of the University of Illinois Extension says More and more plants are grown in containers. They are easier to ship that way. However, the roots may become encircled by growing around and around in the pot. So his advice is to pull the plant out of the container. Then cut the bottom half of the root ball into 4 parts. This process is known as butterflying. The bottom of the root ball will look something like the spread open wings of a butterfly. David Robson says planting the root ball this way will improve growth.
It's amazing on a tree or shrub how much faster growth you will get, but you do have to remember by butterflying you are cutting down the overall height of that root ball. So maybe butterfly it first, then measure how tall that root ball is, then dig your hole to make sure you don't dig it too deep so the plant is sitting below soil line.
He also advises against letting shrubs grow taller than 4.5 meters.
Some shrubs get too tall, you start losing their ability to produce good flowers.
In that case, your ornamental plant might not be so ornamental.
Grow it yourself, turning bulbs into beautiful blooms.
Bulbs are underground plant stems. They provide food for a shoot. Some bulbs produce flowers year after year. Gardening experts say tulips, daffodils, and other bulbs are not very difficult to grow. Bulbs do well in climates with a cold season. They are placed in the ground about the time of the first frost. But with the right preparation, they can also grow well in places where the ground never freezes. Mike Lizotte of American Meadows, an online store, says before you start, you need to know whether to plant tender bulbs or hardy bulbs. If you live in a cold area, a tender bulb will need special care when the growing season is over.
If you want that bulb to survive or come back, you would literally have to dig it out of the ground and bring it inside into a warm area, because it will not survive, or it would get killed by the cold temperatures.
But Mike Lizotte says a hardy bulb can stay in the ground all year.
A hardy bulb is one that prefers cold temperatures, so therefore it can be left in the ground, such as a daffodil or a tulip.
Sandra Mason from the University of Illinois Extension Service has some suggestions to get a good start on planting bulbs. First, the most important thing is to choose a place with soil that drains well.
How wet the soil is. That ends up being a big issue for certain areas. If you have a lot of clay in your soil, you may find that bulbs either don't last a long time for you, as in just a couple of years, or you may find they just don't do very well at all and they actually rot in the soil.
Sandra Mason suggests planting most big bulbs, like tulips or daffodils, about 15 to 20 centimeters deep. Smaller bulbs can be planted about 7 to 10 centimeters deep. She says she enjoys planting smaller ones like snowdrop bulbs.
I love planting those because you don't have to dig a very deep hole. We like those.
Bulbs should be planted with their pointed end up, toward the surface. But some bulbs do not seem to have a pointy end. In that case, Ms. Mason says, look for an eye that might have a stem. But don't worry if you cannot find one.
The good news is the bulbs will figure it out.
Do not use fertilizer for the first year. After that, if you do fertilize the bulbs, do not mix the fertilizer in the planting hole. It could burn the roots. There is a trick people can use to grow bulbs in places where the ground never freezes. Keep the bulbs cold in a refrigerator for about 3 months. Then take them out and let them get used to the warmth. Now, the bulbs will be ready to develop normally, colorful blooms and all.